We know that virtual coaching has become more competitive than ever. NASM's got you covered with our virtual coaching course. NASM's virtual coaching course provides a complete solution to help you translate your services into a successful virtual platform. This course will give you the tools to build and operate a sustainable virtual business model. The formats may be different, but you're still delivering fitness training and effective behavioral coaching. That doesn't change even if you can't be in the same physical space as your clients. The truth is, this is the way to reach more clients and expand your reach and impact. There's never been a better time to carve out your very own virtual space, and NASM is here to help. Welcome to NASM's virtual coaching.
You are listening to the NASM CPT podcast with Rick Ritchie, the official podcast of the National Academy of Sports Medicine.
Welcome to the NASM CPT podcast. My name is Rick Ritchie, and today I am hanging out with the big guys. As this is leading up to a season where bodybuilding and physique and those kind of competitions are taking place. So our friend Mike Fantagrassi has put me in contact with a gentleman named Andre Adams. So Dre, tell me a little bit about you, your background, your experience with bodybuilding and this kind of world that we see this stuff happening in, and your experience with NASM and how you know Mike Fantagrassi.
Sure. You know, it's interesting how things tend to come full circle. You know, in terms of bodybuilding, I've been in the sport about 10 years now. I actually started in the world of competitive powerlifting. And once, you know, that kind of 2011, 2012 timeframe hit, we started to see this kind of surge in the fitness industry with some of the new divisions like physique and bikini and, you know, all of the ones that are a little bit more attainable for people to go to the gym regularly. So I got involved in the men's physique division way back then when it first came out. And, you know, it was something that I found it was something I was passionate about and I was able to excel in. But really what I loved about it is the networking, the meeting of people. And a lot of it was just, you know, learning about your body and giving yourself that kind of structure and discipline. So from there, I was able to earn my pro card through the NPC IFBB. And managed to win, you know, some pro shows, qualify for the Mr. Olympia in the physique division and Arnold Classic. So I've been fortunate enough over the last few years to travel the world, competing in a lot of international shows through the IFBB. And then, you know, kind of building out this network of connections. That's actually how Mike and I, you know, first met. I was going through my own courses with NASM, initially with certified personal trainer and fitness nutrition. And then, you know, we came out with the NASM Masters program, which was something that was fascinating to me. So I flew out to San Diego. That's where I met Mike. You know, I passed the Masters Summit, and it's been something that I've been, you know, proud of as an advocate for NASM. And so now here we are in 2020, you know, going on 2021. And I actually compete in the classic physique division now. So I had to put on about 50 pounds for this weight class.
Whoa. Which
is pretty cool. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the training and nutrition side. And, you know, it's, again, a lot of it is, I think a lot of athletes are looking for that kind of self-enlightenment to learn about the body. And, okay, I know I need to eat more protein or carbohydrates to build muscle, but why does it work that way? You know, so that's where Mike and I have started to have these discussions from a science-based perspective on how do we achieve these goals for body composition.
Well, there are a lot of questions that take place here, and you mentioned some of them really, and that's the bodybuilding, but then there are now these different levels. Mm-hmm. There's physique, and I'd mentioned just before we got started, my buddy Kareem he was in Florida over the weekend, and he won in his division. So physique C, he won in his division, so it's really exciting. But he also said, you know, you take these competitions and you got to kind of pack them all in and do them when they're back to back. because it doesn't make sense to go through all this work for one competition. So there are multiples that seem to be here. So with that being said, I know that some are coming up. Can you just talk us through what's happening right now? And now this won't make much sense for people that listen 3 months from now of what's going on. So just so you know, everybody, this is recorded the Monday before Thanksgiving 2020. And there are a series of shows that are taking place. And leading up to these shows, there are different divisions. Can you talk us through the shows, the different, I guess the different productions that take place? So you mentioned IFBB, is that what it was? That and there are different kind of different organizations that have these things. But then also talk a little bit about the divisions, because you did say it. I laughed a little bit because it kind of unintentional backhanded compliment, which is you said they're more attainable. and it's true. Like, it's hard to be the juggernauts up there on stage. So other things like physique have popped in. Tell us about those and tell us about these competitions.
Sure. So I think for that, we'll kind of go back to, what the roots of bodybuilding were, and then where we're at today and how we all fit into that. So if we think back 20 years ago, I have a lot of friends that were competing back then. And, the show that just took place this weekend in Florida is NPC Nationals. That's actually where I earned my own pro card 7 years ago. So the levels to the sport are really, you have a bunch of regional shows for NPC, which is the amateur division of the IFBB. And, you have to qualify at these regional shows. So win your height class, win an overall, and that will qualify you for a national show. And there's a series of those where you can earn your pro card by either winning your class, depending on which particular show it is, like junior nationals or, Team Universe. But nationals typically it's in Miami or in Florida. That's usually the what we consider the big, like, full national show.
Okay.
And, in order to become a pro, you have to be a national champion. So there's a lot of levels to it, but basically think about regional shows in your local cities or states and qualifying for these, junior national or national shows. And then you have to become a national champion to earn your pro card. And then it's like you're starting from scratch, right? So now as a pro, you're competing against people like myself or better, right, that have been doing this for 10 years, 15 years, and you feel like a baby all over again. So it's a whole new learning curve once you go pro. Kind of like boxing, right? When you can have an Olympic boxer in the amateurs and they have to retrain themselves because, it's a lot of different strategies and things that go into being a pro. So very similar in bodybuilding and fitness. Now, back in the early days, it was literally the overall winner of a show got the pro card. So if you had 500 contestants, right, one person really was walking away. You had to win the overall. Whereas today, there's so many people. The shows, just since I've been in the sport, on the national stage, have grown from, I'd say, somewhere in that 600 to 800 contestant range, as high as 1,500 athletes in a show. So massive turnouts. And again, it's just a lot of that is proportional to the amount of new divisions. So now you have in the men's divisions, you have like men's physique, right? That's more of so those are the ones wear the board shorts. Yes. And it's evolved tremendously since I started there, where it was more of like a beach body kind of swimmer look, nice definition, but not overly muscular, to now these guys they look like mini bodybuilders, right? Yeah. So, and it's natural if you think about the evolution of, if you're training hard, you're dieting consistently, and you're building muscle over 3, 4, 5 years, you're going to get bigger and harder, right? That's just the nature of the sport. So because of that, they've grown into new divisions. Like the one that I currently compete in is classic physique. And it, so each one kind of has their own aesthetic look. And that one, they're trying to target that kind of old school, golden era bodybuilding, the Frank Zane's and Arnold Schwarzenegger look. Yeah. So they're controlling your height to weight proportions, which I think is a fun division to be in. And you get to, showcase things like your posing and stuff like that you don't really get to do in the men's physique division. And then you've got 212. So that one's going to be, tailor-made for people that are naturally a little bit shorter and stockier in nature, because a 6-foot guy that's 212 isn't going to have the same proportions as, a 5'6" guy that's 212.
Right.
And then, of course, open bodybuilding. So now in the women's divisions, they've expanded that out to, if you think back in the day, like Bev Francis, right, they had women's bodybuilding. But now it's really the most popular divisions are really the bikini division and figure. And now, as of this year, 2020, they added a new one called wellness, which is kind of a blend between the two. So there's a lot of levels to that. And then women's physique, women's bodybuilding. So you can see how it just scales outwards, and there's opportunities for people with different natural body types to fit into one of those categories.
Okay. You mentioned something also. You said the word, they're naturally this, and that was initially you spoke that with the guys wearing the board shorts and the physique.
Right.
And then, they do look a little different. That has evolved over time as well. These evolutions, I think, are interesting. I think they're good for the sport because they're able to get a lot more people interested, a lot more people competing. What does that look like? I do want to ask about the recommendations for diet and what does that mean? But also, I would be remiss if I do not ask the question about supplements that may be a bit more shady than some of that we would just call supplements. So we understand hormone therapies, steroids, things like that. I want to have this conversation with you because, if we walked through this whole conversation and at the end I didn't ask that question, people would be like, "What? Why wouldn't you bring that up?"
Right.
Because it's uncomfortable. That would be why I wouldn't bring it up. I want to bring it up with you. I want to find out what that means and how that's dealt with within the sport. And is there a difference between divisions and who does what and what is legal and what's not legal and what are the expectations?
Right.
Because from my perspective, if you were just one of those big guys, I'd be like, there's no way you can do that naturally. There's no way. Like, how did they get that big? So please talk us through what some of that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is an important conversation to have. It's kind of that black art that we call bodybuilding, right? Where there's a lot of, it's almost like opening up Pandora's box and there's a lot of questions in there. And I think, the fundamental key when you're starting any type of health and fitness program is to have a fundamental scientific understanding of how your body works, how micro and macronutrition works, and then some of those adaptations of how your body's going to respond to different training throughout the course of any kind of prep, right? So just kind of starting out, I think that's the most critical element. Most people will work with a health professional or a prep coach. And, I think one of the risks today, because there's so much information out there, there's so many forums, there's all this, I call it junk, right, on the internet. And it can be a little bit scary, right, for people that are starting out and don't take necessary precautions. They can go down a rabbit hole and start experimenting with different supplements and pro hormones and all of those things that fall into that bucket. And it can be a dangerous situation. So my recommendation for anyone is work with a knowledgeable dietitian and or prep coach. You have some prep coaches that are more knowledgeable than some dietitians just from all the data they've collected and athletes that they've worked with. So I think that's the most important. You need to make it a science-based approach. You need to constantly monitor whether you're a natural athlete or whether you're taking pro hormones or endogenous, hormones. I think it's critical that you get your blood work checked, even just from intense, strenuous exercise, and then normal over-the-counter supplements like pre-workouts. Are high in stimulants that can cause adrenal fatigue, issues with your T3, T4 hormones, with your thyroid. So we should really be monitoring that in any type of sport that requires intense training to begin with. So that would come down to working with someone like a Titan Medical, right? I think they're out of Orlando. Or it could be your primary care doctor, just to get a baseline on what are your baseline triglycerides, cholesterol, your hormones, right? That's your testosterone, your estradiol. What does all that look like? Are you healthy enough to commit to something as intense as bodybuilding prep, which takes place over 12 to 20 weeks? Right. So that, I think that's the most critical fundamental part. And we'll get into more of the specifics, but it's, as far as legalities and things like that, there's different organizations. So, if you're looking at competing in a natural bodybuilding league, you'll see some really big guys. Some of those guys, like a lot of people don't realize, Ronnie Coleman was natural until he won the Mr. Olympia, right? And
until he won it.
Until he won the Mr. Olympia.
Really?
So you have people that have extreme genetics that respond to training adaptations. They respond to, carb cycling and your insulin response and all of the things that go into a bodybuilding diet. But then, not everyone has those genetics. So some people are naturally low in testosterone. They might look for testosterone replacement therapy, like, the TRT or hormone, working with a medical professional. So I think in terms of competing, if you're competing in a natural league, then that's a little bit different, right? That you're going to get tested. If there's any, signs of endogenous testosterone, pro hormones, anything that would be on the banned supplements list, banned substances, then, you wouldn't be able to compete in those divisions. But some of the broader divisions, like, the IFBB and pretty much any of the other leagues that are not listed as natural, honestly, it's probably just an athlete personal decision at that point. And again, and you'll see it, I've coached people, hundreds of people over the years myself. And, you have people that have different genetics and make different personal choices. And you have to be knowledgeable enough to, and responsible enough to A, refer them to a medical professional, and then B, understand what the impacts of any kind of supplementation are on, how the body responds to things like protein synthesis, luteinizing hormone, are they going to effectively be able to metabolize carbohydrates, fats, and proteins? So that's where you get kind of into that sweet science of it, just understanding the body on a scientific level.
It's amazing just to hear you talk, because the amount of knowledge about physiology that I hear you speaking about right now is pretty incredible. There are words that, that you've even said so far. I'm like, I don't even know what that means. So, the knowledge that so many bodybuilders have now about, and you in particular, it's just like a more refined case as you're like typical bodybuilder, but there's so much information. There are PhD bodybuilders who are out there doing research in this field. They are studying it. I think it's interesting. I want to point out a couple of things. One, there was a report that came out in baseball, and this is the Sammy Sosa years and the Mark McGuires, and we get all of these, home runs that are being hit, and they're 70 something home runs in one season, and blowing our minds.
Right.
When the report came out at the end of it, so that 60% of the people that were taking steroids were the pitchers. And that's pretty incredible, considering that there are only a few pitchers on a team and everybody else is a batter. So we get this kind of information. And I remember reading an article when I went through my master's program, and this was 2006, and it was an argument for the case of steroids. And I thought, before I even read the article, I was like, this is going to be awful. It's going to be awful. I'm not going to be. I read that article. I was like, oh, this is really interesting. It's really good. It is very smart. And these were researchers that wrote it. So with that being said, I just think that one of the things that we're seeing is the playing field has to be distinct, right? So if there are going to be people who are using supplements and those who are not, and steroids and other hormone therapies, it's hard to mix that, because clearly you're going to have an advantage if you're using versus not using. So with that being said, what I don't want to do is I don't want to paint a brush and just say it is wrong, or, you shouldn't do these things. You're speaking to it very well, though. You're saying, look, it's a medical supervision. There are people who are educated, blood work's being done, we're being tested. It's got to be safe. And I think that these things can be done safely. And that was the initial issues 20 years ago, 15 years ago. Like, is it safe? And I think that we've got some track over time to give us an idea of what the consequences look like. Right. So there are professional bodybuilders who are 70 years old now, right? that we know what they look like. We know what some of these outcomes are, and they're being tracked. So it's better than what it used to be, where it was a if then, and if it was steroids, it was always then there's a really bad outcome.
Right.
And that's not necessarily the case, but you are very wise to say this is something to be supervised and safely administered with medical professionals. So thank you for adding that to it. Let's talk about, first of all, let's talk about for the people who can see us. I'm in the video next to you. I look like your snack. Okay, so I'm like just a little guy, and you take up the entire screen, which I think is pretty funny. Talk to us about training for aesthetics. What does this mean? And can we look at this in the world of, in the eyes of NASM? Because I think what a lot of people do is that a lot of people are lifters, they're in the bodybuilding, and they almost immediately discount a progressive model because they say, oh, you stand on one leg while you do overhead presses, or, they take the things that are so far away from what they would train and say, we can't do the stuff that actually helps us to get our results that we speak to in the OPT model, simply because we have additional components to our model. How does the OPT model work within this kind of realm of aesthetics and bodybuilding?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And, as I went through my own career in bodybuilding, especially after becoming an NASM master trainer and learning a little bit more about, functional movements, body mechanics, and anatomy, you start to develop and adapt some of those acute variables to be more specific to what you're doing. And, if we look at what is the criteria for something that, if it's going to be a competitive bodybuilding or fitness event, right? Things that you're typically going to be scored on ultimately are symmetry, overall muscle size, muscle roundness and fullness, right? Front to back or top to bottom proportions, and then overall conditioning, hardness, and aesthetics, we'll call it. So that's really the criteria. Whereas for general fitness, we're kind of looking for things like, proprioception, injury prevention, core stabilization. And I think a lot of that still has to take place in order for you to advance yourself and progress into an athletic event. So, the way I look at that is primarily throughout my career, I've trained in, I'll kind of do a deloading phase before and after prep, where I'm in that kind of phase one of the OPT model, a lot of stabilization stuff, just making sure your foundation is good to allow you to grow and then eventually get into the strength phases where you can start pushing a little bit more weight and building muscle. So for me personally, I primarily train in, kind of that phase 2 through 4, ultimately focusing on strength hypertrophy, right? That's the pump. So when you're working out, trying to build muscle, your biggest goal is really to shuttle as much blood flow, oxygen, and nutrients into the muscles as you possibly can. And that's where things like, from a micronutrient standpoint, a good pre-workout that's high in, let's say, BCAAs, it might be beta-alanine, which is going to buffer lactic acid and allow you to train harder for longer before your muscles fatigue. And then, just being knowledgeable about that, it might be creatine or other ingredients in the pre-workout, even intra-workout, which wasn't big when I started lifting 20 years ago. Intra-workout is a big deal now, where, things like essential amino acids and fast digesting glucose, you'll kind of have that in a shaker bottle so that you're promoting muscle growth throughout your workout.
Interesting.
And then I think the biggest kind of the golden ticket is really what you're doing post-workout to build the muscle. So let's kind of put the training adaptations on the side for the moment.
Okay.
After any intense exercise, let's figure you spent 60 minutes in the gym, you went through a full strength hypertrophy workout, and you're completely fatigued, your body is in a catabolic state. And that's like a fundamental thing that people need to understand is you can't kind of be in this in between. You're either building muscle, right, growing in an anabolic state, or you're catabolic, where you're starting to break down muscle tissue and convert it to amino acids and glucose, right? So when you're in that state, you need to switch from a catabolic back into an anabolic state to repair, recover your muscles, and ultimately grow. So then we want that fast digesting carbohydrate, like dexanhydrous glucose. There's a product by First Form that I've been using for 7 years. And you'll stack that with a hydrolyzed protein that's broken down and it assimilates a little bit faster into the bloodstream. So all that stuff's going to help shuttle those nutrients back into the muscle, recover, repair muscle glycogen, and then ultimately grow.
Man, this is layered on pretty thick. So I love this. Let's talk a little bit more about macronutrients then. So to me, I think you just hit the buzzword. A lot of people can go really hard in the gym.
Yep.
What does that look like when you get done? And I always think about my friend Jordan, who after he was done with the training session, his client left. And as they were leaving, he said, "Hey, just remember, this is the most important part of your workout." And he was referencing sleep and he was referencing nutrition. So
Yep.
what are the nutrition kind of rules of thumb when it comes to post-workout nutrition or nutrition in general, like just taking us through what should you be doing if you're trying to build muscle?
Sure. And so we'll kind of look at it in two different ways, right? So everything that your friend says is 100% accurate. And I kind of break it down to what's the long-term goal from the phase I'm in? Am I trying to grow, right? People will call that a bulk or a building phase. Or am I trying to burn fat and lose body weight? So if we're trying to grow, certainly the most important thing is just what we just talked about, is having that fast digesting carbohydrate and protein immediately post-workout. So that's something I bring to the gym. As I'm leaving the gym, I'm already getting that into my body and starting the recovery process. And then because it's fast assimilating, it's only going to sustain you for about 30 to 40 minutes. So you want to have that whole food meal ready about 30 to 40 minutes after that post-workout shake, right? Okay. And normally I don't like to have a lot of fats in that meal. Now, if you're trying to bulk, you might want the extra fats to get the calories. But if you're trying to, avoid some unnecessary fat or anything like that, I normally don't like to have the fats within that kind of hour before or after my workout. Just because when you have that post-workout shake, what that fast digesting carb is actually doing is spiking your glucose, right? And what happens when you spike glucose? Insulin kicks in, and insulin almost does its job too good. It opens up muscle receptors, pulls everything into the muscles, right, to hold it. So if you got a lot of fats floating around in there, you're going to hold some unnecessary fats, right? Mm-hmm. So those are kind of my rules of thumb immediately following post-workout shake. 30 minutes later, whole food, and then back to normal after that.
Okay. And what are your daily protein intakes like? Or, rule of thumb, not yours necessarily, even though I would be interested in yours, because I imagine your consumption of protein based on your weight and size is probably enormous.
It can be, and it depends. Everyone's different. Every coach has their own style too. I've personally, over the years, I've probably tried every dieting style, again, for self-enlightenment, because everyone responds a little differently.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's phenomenal. Over the years, your body can change, where things that worked for me 10 years ago don't work for me anymore, and I have to have a different approach now.
Yeah.
So, my kind of rule of thumb for protein, typically 1.5 to 2 grams per pound of body weight is that target range that we're in. And you'll see that move up and down depending on, again, if you're in a growing or a cutting phase. I like to have that, and your body typically likes to have that consistent amount of protein. We try to target every 2.5 to 3 hours for our meals. I would say on average 5 to 7 meals a day. Even when you're in the cutting phase, it's just the meal portions shrink down. And, when you're growing, the big thing is really making sure you get enough properly timed carbohydrates. I typically try to stay with complex carbs. If you're cutting, you're going to want things that are low on the glycemic index, so you're not constantly spiking your insulin throughout the day and holding fat. Mm-hmm. So again, spreading those 5 to 7 meals out every 2.5 to 3 hours. During the bulking phase, what I would tell people, if someone's trying to gain muscle, right, first thing I would do is fix their post-workout nutrition. And then the next thing I would do is have them work with a knowledgeable coach or dietitian, figure out their total energy expenditure for the day. And that's kind of their baseline they're going to use to manipulate their calories, right? You want to be at a caloric surplus if you're trying to grow. Rule of thumb, if you can, once you establish your baseline, let's say that's 2,000 calories a day, If you increase that by 500 calories 7 days a week, that's 3,500 calories or 1 pound of mass. So that's kind of a good rate where you're not building an excess amount of fat, but you should be able to build muscle there at about 1 to 2 pounds a week.
Oh, wow, incredible, man. All right, what other tips do you have? I mean, I'm happy that I can listen to this again and be like, all right, let me take some notes and get this in.
Oh, I'm sure, we could honestly have a whole session just on micronutrition throughout the day, right? When you first wake up, for general health, if it's a specific bodybuilding goal and you're looking for, hypertrophy, things like agmatine or arginine, the citrulline are going to improve blood flow and vasodilation, right? So there's any amount of segments that we could dive into. But I think since we talked a little bit about growing, let's kind of reverse that, right? If we're cutting now, so I just did 2 shows recently, right? I did the Chicago Pro, which was ironically in Atlanta this year because of the pandemic. And then I competed out at Legion Sports in Reno. So during that cutting phase, it's a different animal. You are, I would say in the beginning, a typical prep would be about, let's say 12 to 14 weeks on average, right? And my rule of thumb is, again, I like to target about 1 pound a week for weight loss, just like when I'm growing. The reason behind that is anything more than that, if you start dropping 3 to 5 pounds a week, you're burning muscle along with the fat. And the goal of bodybuilding is to retain as much muscle, lean muscle mass as possible, and then slowly, chip away. It's like an artist, like you're sculpting, you're chipping away the body fat. So I target about 1% body fat and 1 pound of weight loss per week when I'm in the cutting phases. And typically how we get there is primarily through some adaptations in the training. So we're going to increase our set volume, where I might have been doing, let's say 20 to 25 sets in a full workout during the bulk phase. I'm typically doing 30 to 35 sets during the cutting phase, a little bit more body weight, a little bit higher volumes. So your set volume goes up, and then we start adding cardio and pulling back the carbs, right? So typically for me, I prefer to do fasted cardio, LISS, so low intensity, steady state. If you're short on time, you can certainly incorporate some HIIT cardio. For me personally, I tend to hold more lean muscle tissue when I do low intensity, steady state for longer. That gets you in that anaerobic state, but you're not burning a lot of glucose and you're fasted, so you don't really have glucose, which means if you're doing intense exercise, your body's breaking down muscle tissue and converting it to glucose. So I like to do low intensity cardio, 30 to 60 minutes in the morning, a few times a week. And then we also add in some pre or post workout cardio, depending on the day. So that's kind of the big rule of thumb during the cutting. And then over the course of those 12 weeks, you're going to scale back your calories, maybe 5% every 2 to 3 weeks. You might be carb cycling or doing some intermittent fasting, depending on the coach. You've probably heard of, like, a lot of people are into keto now, right? Oh, yeah. I actually have a friend, one of my friends through First Form, who is, we just competed together in Chicago, and he looks phenomenal. He actually placed ahead of me, and he's a keto bodybuilder, which is insane.
That's impressive. That's impressive.
My body would not respond to it. You need glycogen typically to fill out your muscles, which comes from carbs. And my body just looks flat and weird when I go keto. So
yep.
It's amazing though. Everyone's body is different.
I think it's remarkable, and it's amazing what the body can do. You talked about changing. This is one of the things that I hear. I'm going to say that I hear just kind of the casual bodybuilder, the local gym bodybuilder say that they never do cardio because cardio burns your muscle. It metabolizes your muscle. So I never do it. And of course, they're always, a lot of the ones that I've met throughout the years have not been the leanest bodybuilders that I've ever met, but they, in their mind, all they want to do is get bigger and bigger and bigger. How do you address that? And, I guess from a professional bodybuilder's point of view, you do cardio. Cardio gets done. How are you able to lose that fat and not the muscle? Or is there a percentage that gets lost in each one of those that allows you to go, all right, well, this is a planned for loss of muscle?
Right. So that's a great question. And honestly, it's probably one of the most asked questions that people that have been competing for years have trouble figuring out. Now, again, everyone's body responds different, but for most people, and this also does matter, let's be honest, right? We talked a little bit about supplementation and, hormones and things like that. If you're on a hormone therapy or you have elevated levels of testosterone, you're definitely going to hold more muscle just naturally, right? Inherently, I should say. Yeah. But is that a prerequisite for holding muscle? Absolutely not. Most guys, right, we have we'll call it a small guy syndrome, if you will. Everyone's afraid to lose muscle because you work so hard to build it. And it does, if you're a person that's a hard gainer, it's very difficult for you to build the muscle, but you lose it like that if you don't plan your diet and you have too much cardio. So the ways to work around it, again, doing things like low intensity, steady state for longer. When I say longer, that's basically at least 30 minutes to, switch your body into an anaerobic state and then purely start burning fat. Avoiding HIIT workouts when you're in a fasted state. If you're afraid of losing muscle mass, again, I would avoid post-workout cardio because you need that recovery to happen immediately since you're already catabolic, right? So those are some of the adaptations that I would normally recommend. But you always need to keep some level of cardio, even in the off season. It's never truly an off season. We'll call it the growing season. A lot of guys are chasing a number, and I think guys are more prone to this than women because women are the opposite, right? They don't like to see the scale numbers going up. Guys are like, man, I want to put on 20 pounds of muscle. And, I always keep the same cardio routine in my off season. I just shorten the durations down. So I'm still doing, like right now, I'm in we'll call it a growing season. And I'm doing, 3 to 5 days a week of 25 minutes of morning cardio, which is also just for my mental clarity, just to kind of, my kind of escape for the day. But it helps keep you a little bit leaner as you're starting to put that size back on. So definitely keep the cardio in. Other micronutrients that you can add in, especially during a fasted state. And you'll get this argument that, if you add something like BCAAs and it's no longer fasted cardio. Personally, I think that's kind of BS, right? You are fasted, but we want to add something in that helps support muscle tissue. So I like to add in about 5 to 10 grams of both BCAAs and glutamine before any fasted cardio. But then you can also, that's a great time to take, if you're taking a fat burner or a thermogenic, to maximize the amount of fat loss that's being targeted. That's an optimal time to do it is before your fasted cardio. Things like L-carnitine, right? Other things that help promote metabolism of fats. Great time to do it is pre-cardio.
Look, I remember when I was in college, and everybody wanted to be a bodybuilder in college. I was eating so much protein, I was sick. I was like, man, if you don't supplement, you can't eat this much protein and eat. Right? Like you have to have it. Yeah. But it also costs a fortune.
It does.
This is a lot of supplementation that can take place, right? So between the BCAAs and the additional protein, and you mentioned a fat burner, there are all these things. So if we're going to narrow this down, Dre, so we're going to bring it down to a budget. Budget us on give me triage. What do we do first?
So first and foremost, for anybody who's engaging in physical exercise, we'll call it multivitamin, right? If your body doesn't have the essential micronutrients to have those normal day-to-day chemical reactions, you're not going to be able to build muscle as efficiently. You're not going to be able to break down your food, digest and absorb it as efficiently. So I think promoting the just overall health, start with a good multivitamin and just some, general notes there. Avoid hard pressed pills. If you pick a bottle up and shake it and it sounds like a bottle of rocks, throw that sucker away. And or worst case, because it's probably expensive, worst case, take that, crack them in half so that you can actually absorb some of those nutrients. But ideally you want either powdered or encapsulated vitamins, right? And that holds true for most of any micronutrients that you're taking. So I think start there. Everyone can do that. And we look at different things. Let's take, for us, we're guys, right? We will spend a fortune on putting premium, unleaded, high octane fuel in our car. But then when it comes to supplements, people want to bargain shop on the clearance rack. I don't understand that. So for me, it's like, all right, let's start with a premium, high quality multivitamin, other good things for anyone to take, things like fish oil, right, that are high in omega-3s. Those are essential fatty acids that will help reduce inflammation and help with your cardiorespiratory system. So I think that's another important one to have. Now, when we get specific to bodybuilding, we'll call it the sexy things that people like are pre-workouts, right? You see people with C4 or any of those that, are highly commercialized and people kind of gravitate towards those. But the reality is the best bang for your buck, if you're trying to build muscle, is really going to be starting with that post-workout stack we talked about, right? The fast digesting carbohydrate and hydrolyzed protein, ideally. And then, if we're in that bulking phase, I personally, I've never been a fan of mass gainers. There's a bunch of junk in there. You'll see them high in carbs, but normally people just get fat when they take them. So stick to, a good whey protein, and that's kind of good for any time of the day. It's going to assimilate similar to whole food every, 2.5 to 3 hours. So it's good for a meal replacement shake. And then I think I would probably limit it there, honestly. Now, if you've got the budget, then you can start adding in the other things like the pre-workouts, the intra-workouts, glutamine, right? Glutathione, all these other things that are just good for general health.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that. So I got two more questions. One is, what is the importance of vascularity in a competition?
So, that's more of, since it is a subjective sport, and I think one of the best examples in the highest level of sport would be comparing, let's take Ronnie Coleman in his heyday. Everyone knows Ronnie. Right. Everybody knows Jay, one of the greatest bodybuilding rivalries in history, two of my personal favorites of all time. And you look at the physiques, both what we would call mass monsters in the sport of bodybuilding.
For sure.
Ronnie is known for just having this insanely grainy, vascular physique. And when you put him next to someone that doesn't have that, it's just, maybe it's subjective, but it looks better. Now, everyone's, and again, this comes down to genetics too. Sometimes, it's a function of how lean you are and how much subcutaneous water retention you have. But then there's just some things that people genetically are better at, and that's one of them. Jay could get down to 1% body fat, and I don't think he'd ever get to that vascularity level. Now, again, through the supplements we talked about today, we have a lot more knowledge than, say, back in Arnold's day. You can take things like agmatine and citrulline and arginine and all these vasodilators that are, you should be taking anyway when you're training, because they're going to promote muscle growth and hypertrophy. You can certainly take those to help.
Okay. All right. And the other thing too, because you mentioned subjective, I just say this again, I'll mention my buddy Kareem because he just posted his pictures for his competition he did. And I gotta be honest, man, like I see him and I'm like, how perfect he looks. And then he gets up there next to these other guys and I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, how do you tell the difference? Who wins and who doesn't? They all look fantastic.
Yeah. So that is a great question. Again, subjectivity, right? Name of the game. And you might feel like I am invincible, I'm unbeatable today. And you get on stage and everyone else, you look around and everyone else is on a whole nother level. So it all depends on, it's all relative. So it depends on who's on stage with you that day. Okay. And then in addition to that, who executed their peak week, we'll touch on that. So who peaked out the best for that particular show? Which set of judges were there that may have preferred, you got some judges that prefer, let's say, size and symmetry over conditioning. Then you might have others that naturally prefer conditioning over symmetry. So it depends on what they're looking for. Now, and that's,
what do you mean when you say conditioning?
So conditioning would be body composition, right? So
okay.
How low your body fat percentage is, muscle separation, detailed, feathering, striations when you flex your muscles. Those are all things that you're being scored on. And for each division, there's different requirements. So if you're a female and you're competing in bikini and you have striated glutes, you're not going to do so well.
Yeah.
Right? You're too lean. So you're too lean for that division. But if you were in women's physique, that's a requirement, right?
Interesting.
So you have to, and that's where the coaching comes in, right? You have to understand what the requirements are for that division. And now we've got this kind of broader general body composition. We'll call it prep, right? And how can I tailor make that for my physique for this division? So it really is a sweet science. But
yeah,
it comes down to the judges are going to nitpick. And usually, like you said, it's really close. Sometimes there's a clear winner on stage, but the majority of the time, the top 3 to 5 guys look like they could all win the show.
Right.
And,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so when you go through the comparison round posings, right, so they're going to line everyone up and they're going to take you through all your mandatory poses. And that's really your opportunity to win. You're being scored on who wins each of these poses and where those judges rank you relative to the other competitors on stage.
All right. Do some people just suck at posing? I mean, they're jacked. Yeah. They look great. They're striated, all separation, but they just don't have the smoothness of the movement. Like I watched the choreography. I'm like, man, these guys are just poetic in motion, but some guys just kind of pop in there and make it, does that matter?
Absolutely. So, and here's the tough part about it. It's impossible to quantify it and put like a, posing is 30% of your score type of thing. It's just, we'll call it posing and stage presentation. So, myself, other coaches and athletes that I'm friends with, we often host posing seminars for that reason.
Amazing.
It is such an influential part of your overall score and presentation, right? If you have the best physique on stage, but you can't hold a pose and you're shaky or you're out of position, somebody with a mediocre physique who's in better shape than you, right? He's in less shape than you, can actually beat you because he presented his physique better. So it absolutely matters.
Now, are you constantly, the moment you walk out on stage, are you just a big, just isometric contraction? Are you walking out, squeezing everything?
No. And here's the reason why. You're in a completely depleted state, right? So
I'm sure
all through training, your goal has been muscle glycogen exhaustion, depletion, but down on peak week, you're going to be tapering your water to, you and I actually touched on sodium in one of our emails, right? You're going to be tapering your water to dry out. What you're trying to dry out is your subcutaneous layer. And then you're going to load back up with carbs traditionally so that you have a nice full round muscle belly, but there's not a lot of water. So you are very depleted, exhausted, fatigued. Anyone that's been there will tell you, I've been there 25 to 30 times myself. And the only thing that's probably getting you through there on stage is the adrenaline of the audience, honestly.
Yeah.
And once you hit the stage, adrenaline kicks in and you forget how tired you are. But you do need to focus on being, presenting a good physique the entire time you're on stage, even when you're not the focus. So you might be off to the side, standing in the lineup. And there you want to, kind of have a relaxed pose that still shows your shape and definitely want to, make sure you're still slightly flexing your abs. But I kind of call it the 20-80 rule, right? So when we're standing off to the side, you're flexing about 20%, we'll say, just to make sure that you're presenting a nice shape and things like that, but not exhausting yourself.
And I'm sure the exhaustion gets exacerbated with the lights being on and the environment that you're in. And of course, you probably see all these other monsters that look incredible. And you're like, oh my gosh, do I need to, I know this just from fight sports.
Yep.
Weight cutting is difficult. So weight cutting is difficult. It can be challenging. It can be dangerous. How do you go about doing this safely? And have you ever seen, do people just from, dehydration, has anybody just passed out?
Oh, absolutely. I've seen that.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Now, and it happens to the best of us because you're trying to push your limits, right? In any competitive scenario, it's pushing you beyond what your normal limitations are. And you're trying to find how far can I push it safely and effectively. And sometimes it's not so safe. We've heard Ronnie Coleman tell the story about one of his Olympias where he couldn't get out of bed and thought he was going to have to go to the hospital. And I think he had too many diuretics, right? So he drank some water and he was fine, went out and won the Mr. Olympia. But, I've never personally been in that situation where I felt that bad, but I've certainly seen athletes that overdid it. Here's my philosophy on it. If you are in shape, I mean, truly in shape, you should look good 1 to 2 weeks out from a show. You should look like you could step on stage that day. You shouldn't have to do any short-term manipulations, extreme manipulations. You hear stories of people taking salt baths to try and dry the skin out and, all these crazy things that they're doing. Honestly, you should be able to coast right into that show with very minor manipulations to your water and sodium, and then, reintroduce some carbs after weigh-ins and look good on stage. You shouldn't have to do anything extreme. And if you are doing something extreme, the reason you're doing that is because you're not in shape. That means,
Gotcha.
you need to go back and get in shape and plan for 2 weeks out looking your best.
Yeah. And that's, kind of like cutting weight for fight sports. That's, did you mentioned it already. You said, are you timing it correctly? And you got to time it correctly. I'm sure that comes with practice as well. So people, the biggest horror stories that I hear about cutting weight in fight sports are usually amateurs and early on in the pros, because once you get your reps in, you know what weight cutting's like. You've done it, you've been through it. It's challenging, it can be dangerous, but the people who are used to doing it, and then you have some people who, amazing in fight sports, they just live at their fight weight, which doesn't make any sense the way that things are currently done, that you are now going to fight somebody that's, weighs the same as you, but in 24 hours, he's going to weigh 15 pounds more than you. Right. So that's dangerous when it comes to that as well. But I understand it, at least from that perspective with me. I got one more question and then I'm going to leave you alone. My question now is about sleep. How much sleep do you get? How much sleep do you coach? What is the importance of sleep in this entire process?
Yeah, so sleep is a challenge, especially if you're like me, right? You're not just a bodybuilding competitor. I work full time in an executive level position, so I'm super busy during the day. I run 2 to 3 side businesses that I'm a principal owner in, one being a virtual fitness business. And it's tough to find the time. Arnold Schwarzenegger said it best, right? He always talked about how he only slept about 5 to 6 hours a day. That's not going to work for everyone.
Right.
Put that out there. But his whole point was it allowed him another 2 to 3 hours a day to advance himself towards all these other goals. And jokingly, his advice was learn how to sleep faster.
Sleep faster, yes.
Sleep faster. Honestly, great advice if your body will tolerate it. Now, for building muscle, I will say the one caveat to that is you want to have it, typically 7 to 8 hours is the ideal, right? And women maybe a little bit more. But the purpose of that is for recovery, not just physically, but mentally too, right? You need to kind of reset your mind, get that deep, restful sleep. And there's some different ways to help promote that by adding things like GABA and melatonin and 5-HTP, all these other things that you can take to help promote that deep, restful state of sleep. And you'll notice a difference. You'll start to retain more muscle. You'll recover faster. So I think it is critical. And people don't realize the only time your body, your muscles are actually growing is when you're asleep. Right. Amazing. So when you're awake, you're active, you're doing things, your muscles aren't recovering. When you're asleep, you're recovering. That's
incredible. Trey, thank you so much for your time, man. I appreciate you just, giving us some of your experience, your advice, your background. It's fascinating to me, and I wish you luck in your ongoing endeavors. And if there are people that have questions, they want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that or to follow you? How do we go about, I'm going to Instagram you right now. How do we go about that?
Yeah. So no, that'd be great. Actually, I love responding to people and answering questions. So my email, probably the best way is just email me direct at trainingbydre@gmail.com. And then it's pretty easy to find me on Instagram. It's at @AndreAdams_official. And let's definitely get in touch for anyone that's interested. There's also First Form My Transformation Challenge going on, where I can help coach you for free through the First Form app and get people in shape and start teaching them a little bit about body composition.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Did you say for free?
It's for free. The app, you can download it for free and invite me, add me as your trainer.
All right. Well, I'm downloading that right now for myself. I want to get on board with this. I might put myself to the test with you.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Andre Adams, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your insights and your expertise. It was incredible. And for everybody else that listened and have watched, thank you so much for being a part of the process of learning and educating yourselves. And, this is great. It's self-directed learning, but self-directed learning doesn't mean that you're always the one doing it. Like, you can read a book. Self-directed is you chose to do it, but somebody else wrote the book. Somebody else is at school teaching you, but self-directed is the decision to go back to school. So your self-directed education is really valuable, and thank you for having this be a part of it. My name is Rick Ritchie. You can hit me up on email, rick.richey@nasm.org, or Instagram, where I'm most active, at dr.rickritchie. Thank you so much. This has been the NASM CPT podcast.